I'd like to talk about psychosis in this video, but before we get into that, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Ghazala at the Heart and Soul Cafe. If you've been here before, thank you so much for coming back, and if you're here for the first time, then you're very, very welcome. So psychosis, let's have a look at that. Psychosis is a set of symptoms. It's not an actual mental health disorder in itself. There are mental health disorders that, as you know, some of the symptoms, psychosis is one of the symptoms there. So we don't want to mix it up with things like schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, one of the symptoms, you know, some of the symptoms might be that somebody becomes psychotic, perhaps. So let's have a look at psychosis. So if somebody has very heightened levels of dopamine, as a chemical in their brain, and that heightened level of dopamine might be a result of heightened levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, that person may experience symptoms of psychosis. Okay, so that's usually dopamine is the culprit there, and that's where we might get it. Okay, so the first symptom that I'd like to talk about is the inability to reality test, and this is not being able to differentiate between what's real and what's not real. So I could give you an example of this. Let's say if I was to go over to the window and say, oh, look everyone, there's a flying saucer out there. And you go over to the window and you sort of look up and say, oh yes, it looks like a flying saucer. But most of us would think that, yes, it looks like one, but it isn't actually a flying saucer. It's a bird, or it's a plane, it's Superman perhaps, just joking. But you might sort of think, well, yeah, it's a bird or a plane. It's not actually a flying saucer. But somebody who is experiencing psychosis may take that as at face value. It is a flying saucer, end of. Okay, and that's it. Persistent hallucinations may be where you see, feel, hear, smell, taste things that others can't. Okay, so others can't actually experience those. They can't see them, smell them, taste them, but you can. So that's persistent hallucinations. Persistently delusional, perhaps, where you might have a firm hold on a false belief. You might believe that you are, the Queen of England. You might think that you're an astronaut going off to into space, and you might be, but most of us aren't. So you actually believe something that you might believe that you are a particular biblical character, person. So it's having this grand sort of belief that's not actually real. Okay, disorganized thinking, that sort of jumbled up thinking where something's not really making sense in that person's mind. That might lead to jumbled up speech, where someone's not then making sense when they actually talk either. Disorganized behavior, that might be another symptom where they believe that. So an example of this might be you're invited to a wedding in a very cold country in the middle of December, and it's a church wedding, and you show up in your swimwear. So it's something that's again against societal norms, where it's just behaving in a way that's just not really seen or done or acceptable. Okay. Then there's blunted or flat affect, where somebody, doesn't sort of show any expression at all, and that's a symptom of psychosis. Okay. Avolition, this is when someone doesn't have the motivation to sort of complete any purposeful task, so they just can't really finish anything off that they may start, that they actually maybe find difficult to start in the first place, but absolutely can't see anything through. Psychomotor disturbances, this is anxious, restless sort of movement. It might be sort of swaying, it might be that kind of behavior, movement perhaps, that has no sort of purpose or meaning. So it doesn't have any purpose of meaning to that sort of movement, but it's there. Okay. There was also another one as well, which is was it called? A catatonic state. Catatonic state is when someone maybe completely freezes, has no movement at all, and that might be a state of that might be another symptom, a key symptom of psychosis as well. So there is symptoms there. Treatment is usually would probably most of the time be medication. If somebody was experiencing those sort of symptoms, it would probably be, most of it would be medication to sort of stabilize those chemical imbalances, to get that dopamine level down, perhaps. Again, I remember my father, and I think I've mentioned my father in 1 or 2 videos before, but it sort of fits here. But my father had, my late father had Parkinson's disease, and Parkinson's is, again, your level of dopamine has come very far down, because dopamine is your reward chemical that gives you that reward signal, but also it is involved in your movement. So when the levels of dopamine, come too far down, you might have that involuntary sort of shaking movement, and that's one of the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. If you know anyone who's had Parkinson's, you have that sort of shaking, involuntary shaking. And sometimes, I remember when he was first diagnosed, and as the illness progressed, he was put on some medication, and sometimes, so very low dopamine levels, and he was put on medication which sent his dopamine levels far too high, and he would start, hallucinating. I remember once going to visit him at home, and I walked into his bedroom, and there was apples and oranges on his shelf, and when I opened his cupboard, there was apples and oranges there. And I said, "Dad, why have you got apples and oranges on your shelf and in your cupboard?" And he said, "Oh, they're my friends. They listen to my poetry when I recite poetry." And I said, "Oh." And this is somebody who I've known, obviously all my life, of completely sort of sound mind. So it just goes to show that those dopamine levels, if they go far too high and far too low, what kind of things can sort of perhaps happen to the body. So levels, heightened levels of dopamine can result to symptoms of psychosis. I hope you found the content of this video helpful or informative. Please do share, please do like, please do comment, and please do subscribe. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed. It means so much to me. I've been doing this, I've been running this channel for a few months now, and it's not, you see, the thing is, it's not commercial in any way. My way of recording, you can see it's just very simple. There's no, visuals and things added. And that doesn't mean to say that I'm never going to add those things or ever start editing. It's just, inviting you into my, living room, where I'm talking about mental health, where I'm talking about grief, loss, bereavement, things that I've experienced, and things that I feel I know about, because being a mental health first aid instructor, and I'm, bereavement counsellor. So, just sharing my information that I have, knowledge that I have with you, hopefully with the view that, we sort of raise awareness about things, and we get talking about things and certain topics. I do say, we need to talk about more, especially when I talk about suicide, and there's so many topics that I talk about where I think we need to be just talking about these more. They're difficult to talk about. Yes, I understand that, and I know that, but that doesn't mean to say, we just sort of brush them under the carpet and we just pretend that they're not there. I feel that, no, we need to talk about mental health. We need to talk about bereavement, loss, grief. These things can impact on any one of our lives at any time. We just don't know what's around the corner. And I'm not saying live our lives, with that fear, and live our lives, that's not what I'm saying. live our lives to the best of our ability, enjoy our lives and enjoy those beautiful moments, and please do that. But at the same time, realize that life happens, and things sadly do, negative things do happen in our lives. And if we can be more equipped to dealing with having knowledge about things, and we are probably going to, the outcome would be better for when things do happen in our lives and life does throw a curveball. And I think I'm an example of that, somebody who has experienced mental health, poor mental health. I've experienced situational anxiety, sometimes in my life social anxiety, imposter syndrome. I've experienced depression, I've experienced loss. I've lost my mum, I've lost my dad, I've lost my son. Many of you know about that. So, I've experienced things in my life, and I think I just feel that it's not sort of resiliency in that, it's bouncing back and see how quickly you can bounce back. It's sitting with it and learning, what have I learned from this? How can I turn this around into something, positive, in that I can maybe, educate others and support others who are going through similar things as to what I've gone through in my life. And that's really what it's about. And I think, that's what I'm trying to do. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found the content of it, useful. Please do share, comment, like, subscribe. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, look after your hearts and souls. Thank you.